In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. These are the first words written in the Bible, and they lay out the foundation for one of the most important doctrines of Christianity, the doctrine of creation. The doctrine of creation affirms that God created the entire universe and all in it out of nothing. That is to say, God is the ultimate cause of the universe. The truth of this doctrine is so essential to the truth of the Christian faith that it is not surprising that many Christians have attempted to defend the doctrine from unbelieving skeptics. This explains the popularity of cosmological arguments. Cosmological arguments are a family of arguments that aim to establish the existence of a cause of the universe and further establish that this cause is God as commonly conceived. Such arguments have a great appeal to Christian philosophers because, if successful, they establish the truth of the doctrine of creation and grant rational credibility to the claims of the Bible. However, cosmological arguments, as commonly stated and defended, are actually antithetical to core Christian claims. Firstly, we must understand that the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo entails some other doctrines, most especially transcendence and aseity. These doctrines, creation, transcendence, and aseity, are mutually entailing. The doctrine of transcendence holds that God transcends the created universe. He exists wholly independent of it, outside it, so to speak. He is not bound by the same laws and restrictions that limit things that are part of the universe. The doctrine of aseity affirms that God exists independently of anything external to himself. He does not depend on anything else for his existence or knowledge. He is who he is essentially and in and of himself. Nothing external explains or influences his essence. Now, when it comes to cosmological arguments, there are various formulations, each with its own argumentative strategy. Some argue from the reality of causal relations, others argue from the reality of contingent objects. However, all variations of the cosmological argument presuppose some kind of metaphysical principle, such as the causal principle or the principle of sufficient reason, which allows them to move from some fact about the universe, its contingency or finitude for instance, to the existence of an ultimate cause or explanation which transcends the universe. There are a couple of assumptions made when cosmological arguments are used in this way. First, as an exercise in pre-dogmatic natural theology, cosmological arguments assume epistemological neutrality. That is, neither the existence of God nor the truth of Christianity are taken for granted. The idea is that one can prove the existence of God by looking at the facts objectively and without any Christian assumptions. Second, following from the assumption of epistemological neutrality, it is assumed that man's mind is sufficient to render at least some of the facts intelligible. One does not need to consult God in order to know reality. Third, it is assumed that there is a continuity between our conceptual categories, those of causation and explanation, and the reality beyond our experience. These assumptions are inconsistent with Christian theism and lead to a variety of problems for cosmological arguments. One problem with the cosmological argument is that it makes an illegitimate leap from knowledge of the phenomenal world to what is true of reality beyond possible experience. Causation and explanation are categories which are immanent in experience. That is to say that they are part of how we conceive of the world, how it appears to us. But the cosmological argument wants to make inferences about things beyond this phenomenal world, i.e., a God that transcends the universe and is beyond our experience. Doing so requires one to extend the conceptual categories of causation and explanation beyond the phenomenal world. However, there is no warrant for such a leap. So when principles such as whatever begins to exist has a cause, or all contingent things require an explanation, are proposed, They should be seen as immanent principles that apply only to the world as it appears to us, and not as metaphysical principles which say something about reality beyond our phenomenal experience. What this means is that the best conclusion that can be drawn from a cosmological argument is the existence of a God who is wholly immanent, a God that is a consequence of the way we conceive of the world. A cosmological argument cannot establish the existence of a transcendent God. Dutch theologian and philosopher Cornelius van Til, following Immanuel Kant, explicates this point when he writes, and I quote, "Applying this criticism to the concept of causality, Kant finds that it is a category that is immanent in experience. The concept of causation is subordinate to that of explanation, and explanation must be immanent within the universe. Explanation must be something that is within the reach of the human mind. Kant holds that if we seek to conclude from a series of causes that we observe in the phenomenal world to a cause of the world itself, we contradict our own principle of explanation. It would mean that there is a God who is not penetrable to the human mind. He would be beyond our possible experience. In this manner, we should involve ourselves in contradiction." End quote. A truly transcendent God would be beyond our possible experience, essentially mysterious and impenetrable to the human mind. To attempt to use categories like causation and explanation, whose scope are rooted firmly within our experience, to prove such a God is misguided. Immanent principles and categories prove an immanent God, not a transcendent one. Perhaps considering an analogy would help us see the point better. Consider the author of a story. An author possesses absolute freedom and power to create the story world. An author is truly transcendent. He exists outside the story world and is not influenced by it. He is, in a sense, like God. Now, would the characters in this story world, totally unaided, be able to know anything about the existence and nature of the author? Definitely not. All their arguments, concepts, and categories could never exceed their possible experience. Unless the author decides to make himself known, he would remain a mysterious and unknowable existence to the characters. In the same way, no direct argument utilizing immanent principles could ever establish the existence of a transcendent God. From this, we can see that a cosmological argument does not lend credence to the biblical doctrine of creation. Recall that we noted that the doctrines of creation, transcendence, and aseity are mutually entailing. Because the cosmological argument does not prove a transcendent God, it does not prove a God who creates out of nothing. The immanent God of the cosmological argument is not metaphysically fundamental. He is correlative with man, being engulfed and sustained by a more fundamental existence. The doctrine of aseity is lost. Hence, when it is concluded that God created the universe, it is perfectly valid to ask the proponent of the cosmological argument, who created God? This is because the God that is proved is neither transcendent nor metaphysically necessary. Further problems arise for the cosmological argument. Remember that the cosmological argument assumes the sufficiency and autonomy of man's mind to understand some part of reality. It is assumed that we do not need to consult God's interpretation of the facts in order for them to be intelligible to us. If God needed to be consulted for the facts to make sense, then a neutral proof of theism wouldn't be possible. But the cosmological argument affirms that such a neutral proof is possible. Therefore, the cosmological argument presupposes the just there-ness of the facts. That is, the facts are how they are, independent of any prior interpretative or creative activity. But notice that this is a direct contradiction of the conclusion of the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument wants to establish the existence of a creator of the universe, but to do so, it presupposes that the facts are uncreated. A contradiction lies at the heart of the cosmological argument. Furthermore, If the facts are just there, then it follows that God is merely a co-interpreter of those facts with man. His interpretation is not authoritative. God and man become correlative. They exist on the same metaphysical plane, surrounded by a realm of factuality that is more ultimate than them both. Once again, God's transcendence and aseity is lost. Once again, an analogy would be helpful. In order to properly understand a story world, we must, in our interpretive endeavors, try to mirror the author's perspective. Because we know that the authorial perspective is authoritative and constructive of the fact of the story world, we must take that perspective into account when interpreting. To assert autonomy and say that we can interpret the story world on our own is to affirm that there is no author, that the facts of the story world are just there, and that there is no authoritative or transcendent perspective. All interpreters of the facts would be on level playing field. No one can speak authoritatively to anyone else since they are all co-interpreters of unauthored facts. Epistemological autonomy entails the negation of transcendence. In the same way, since the cosmological argument affirms that the facts can be understood without reference to God, it affirms that there is no transcendent perspective on the world. This contradicts Christianity. I believe that these points of consideration are sufficient to show that Christians who wish to defend the faith should abandon cosmological arguments, at least as commonly presented. Such arguments contain assumptions that deny essential Christian doctrine. If the cosmological argument is not reformulated to forsake these assumptions, then the argument will always refute rather than vindicate Christian theism.